Hello, I'm Lynn Doyle. Thank you for joining us here on Meet the Doctors, where each week we look at important health news, medical breakthroughs, and alternative therapies, and then we tell you how they may impact you and your family. We want to empower you to take charge of your own well-being. Joining us today is a mental health expert who will weigh in on the death of comedic genius Robin Williams and talk about mental illness in this country. Also, we have an emergency room physician who was just in the thick of it during the Boston Marathon bombings. Well, now she's written a best-selling book, which is a patient advocacy guide that is an absolute must-read. She'll be here to talk to us. Plus, we'll have our panel of doctors to answer your viewer email questions. But first, the news. There's a drug warning out for millions of people with atrial fibrillation. That's an irregular heartbeat, who are taking the popular medication digoxin. A large new study found that it may actually shorten the lives of some patients. The findings have some experts asking doctors to reconsider prescribing the drug to their patients. It's also prescribed for heart failure. Digoxin is commonly used to help slow an abnormal heart's rhythm and strengthen the heart's contractions. The research was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and it followed more than 100,000 people with a newly diagnosed atrial fibrillation. Now, those who were prescribed the digoxin were 20% more likely to die over the next several years than those who received other kinds of treatments. What is the worst cancer to get? Experts say pancreatic cancer because it typically kills a person within 12 months. While the odds of surviving other cancers have improved vastly over the past 40 years, the pancreatic cancer survival rate is the lowest of the 21 most common cancers. That's according to a report from the Cancer Research UK. Only 3% of pancreatic cancer patients survive for at least 5 years, and that's up a mere 1% since the 1970s. Experts say it's because pancreatic cancer isn't detected until it's far too late. The Food and Drug Administration has approved the first screening test for colon cancer that uses a patient's DNA to help spot potentially deadly tumors and growths. It's called the Cologuard test, and it's from Exact Sciences. It detects irregular mutations in stool samples that can be an early warning sign of cancer. Patients who test positive for the mutations would automatically undergo a colonoscopy to confirm the results. Cologuard detected 92% of colon cancers and 42% of advanced polyps in a study of 10,000 patients, while traditional blood screening only detected 74% of cancers and 24% of advanced polyps. This new DNA test would cost $599 per patient compared to $25 for a traditional stool blood test. The U.S. spends over $14 billion annually treating cases of colon cancer that go undetected. Post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans can last for decades, according to a new study that looked at Americans who served in the Vietnam War. Most of the 11% of veterans who had PTSD a decade or more after that war showed little improvement since then. More than 18% of Vietnam vets with PTSD had died by retirement age. That's a rate about twice of those without the disorder. Vietnam vets likely to develop PTSD were minorities who had dropped out of high school and those who had killed another in combat. This is important because the Department of Veterans Affairs funded study will have implications for veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, a morning cup of coffee or an afternoon pick-me-up certainly can give you a buzz, but it can also stop a painful condition called tinnitus. That's a steady ringing or buzzing in your ear. Researchers found that women who drank a lot of caffeine were less likely to have tinnitus. 65,000 American women between the ages of 30 and 44 who did not have it in 1991 were followed for 18 years. Now, during that time, nearly 5,300 cases of tinnitus were reported among them. It showed that women who drank less than a cup and a half of coffee were 15% more likely to develop it than those who did not. Cinnamon may actually be able to halt or reverse changes in the brain often seen in Parkinson's disease patients, according to a new lab study involving mice. The animals were fed cinnamon, and then they were able to reverse Parkinson's-like anatomical changes that occurred in their brains. It actually improved their brain function and motor skills, which are affected in Parkinson's patients. That disease affects about 1.2 million patients in the U.S. and Canada, and it's slightly more common in men than in women. Now here's a good one for you. Researchers at Yale University School of Medicine say that preventing weight gain could be as simple as calming the activity of a nuclear receptor called PPAR gamma. That's in a very tiny area of our brains. It's already been successful on mice. Not only did it reduce their appetites, it actually increased their metabolism to such a high degree that the mice spurned a high-fat diet. This dietless weight management could actually be a cure for obesity and keeping at bay diabetes that often occurs in obese people. Well, by now we know about the untimely and tragic death of actor and comedian Robin Williams at the age of 63. He made us all laugh, but he obviously was battling severe depression and frequently spoke openly about his alcohol and drug addictions. He's not alone. There is grave news on the increased number of drug-related suicide attempts in the U.S. Over a recent 6-year period alone, dramatic increases have been seen among the young and baby boomers overall. Suicide attempts involving prescription medications and other drugs jumped by 51% among people as young as 12 up to middle age. That was between 2005 and 2011, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. In 2 different reports, the agency examined trends in ER visits for drug-related suicide attempts. The most significant increases occurred among adults younger than 30. That was up 58% over the 6 years studied. It also showed an increase in people between 45 and 64. They experienced a whopping 104% spike in drug-related suicide attempts. To talk more about this debilitating disease is Newsmax Deputy Health Editor Nick Tate. Nick, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Lynn. You know, when someone as funny and seemingly upbeat as Robin Williams commits suicide, it just doesn't seem to make sense. But mental health experts note that some styles of humor can actually mask depression. You know, for Williams, humor may have been a way to cope with his pain and his addictions. Researchers have even tied certain kinds of humor, self-deprecating humor, to an increased risk of depression and suicide. Oklahoma State University researchers last year found that there were links between people who engage in this kind of humor for an increased susceptibility to depression, depressive symptoms, anxiety, and a kind of neuroticism. They also found that this type of humor may be a predictor of suicidal thinking. Now, Williams was clearly versatile. He did a lot of things, was very funny in a lot of different ways, but if you look throughout his history, his career, there was a persistent streak of self-deprecation that ran through a lot of his interviews in comedy. He was very open about his addictions. He poked fun at them, and his struggles with cocaine and alcohol as well. He even went public with his time in rehab, but it was really only after his death that his publicist revealed that he had very severe depression. Depression is, as we know, a major killer through suicide. It's the second most prevalent cause of disability in the developed world. And by 2020, it's expected to become the second only to heart ailments among diseases that afflict people. Now, only about half the people with major depression get treatment according to the NIH, and only about 20% are treated according to practice guidelines. So, you know, Williams certainly had the wherewithal to get professional help, but I believe that one of the problems was, for him and for others, we often don't think of depression as a serious disease. We think of it as a weakness, a character flaw, or just the blues, and clearly it's not. It's more serious than that, and I hope that a lot of people are hoping that his death may change our view of that, so we do recognize it as, in fact, a brain disorder.
Thank you, Nick. We are going to talk in our next segment about what we as a nation can do to open the lines of communication and to bring that depression out of the shadows. So please stay with us. Meet the Doctors continues right after this. Welcome back to Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. You know, the death of Robin Williams is a terrible loss for his family, his friends, and of course for the entertainment industry. But many times, at times like this, we say, this is a teachable moment. What can we learn from his death that might help our viewers. Here to help us talk about that is Fran Sherman. She is a licensed psychotherapist. She's joining us from our studio in South Florida. And here in our New York studios is Dr. Joseph Raphael, who is an age management specialist who focuses on how to stay younger longer. Thank you both for being with us. Fran, I'd like to start with you if I can. Were you shocked to hear that Robin Williams committed suicide? Or is he the kind of personality that perhaps was always vulnerable to that?
First of all, thank you for having me today. And I was not shocked. I was obviously terribly saddened, as the rest of the world was. He has had a long history of known mental illness, including bipolar disorder, depression, and also periods of substance abuse. So with that known history, which he has talked about, I am not at all surprised. Not at all surprised, but obviously very sad, as the rest of the world is.
Certainly, and his publicist said that he had been battling severe depression as of late. He had returned to rehab. It sounded like he was doing all the right things to try to help himself, but depression can really overtake a person, obviously.
Absolutely. I mean, depression is one of those things that people think, oh, just snap out of it. Well, people don't just snap out of it. It really goes to sort of the depths of their soul. And people who don't suffer from depression don't really realize that it's something that people can't just think themselves out of. It really has to do with their brain chemistry. And when they're that low, they feel completely hopeless and helpless, and that nothing will ever change. So to take his life in the way that he did was such a dramatic way to commit suicide, that he obviously was as clinically depressed as a person could be.
Dr. Raphael, do you think that we on the outside look at these people and we think, oh, they have everything, fame, fortune, any kind of material item in the world, and we can't grasp why they could be unhappy?
Well, we often do think that, but depression is really something that is from the inside, and no matter what you have going on the outside, your brain chemistry, life experiences, things in the past that people can't see when they look at your surroundings can impact that. So it can happen to anybody, really.
I was stunned to hear earlier in the show that Nick Tate talked about the numbers of people committing suicide these days and the increase that was so dramatic in a certain age range between like 45 and 60. Do you see people at a certain age that are more depressed, and is it age related?
Well, there is an element of aging in depression. Midlife women particularly are more vulnerable, particularly when they're going through menopause. I screen for it in my practice all the time because it's of paramount importance. The increase in suicides is a phenomenon that is a little bit more recent, I think, and I'm not sure what's causing that.
It's very disturbing, but we need to be aware of our surroundings. We need to be aware of people, and if they're showing signs of depression or of some sort of mental illness, we really need to encourage them to get help.
We do, absolutely.
And Fran, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation because, you know, it's funny, if someone was diagnosed with heart disease or with breast cancer, we would embrace that person and say, hey, what can we do to help them? But when someone has been diagnosed as having a mental illness, we as a society tend to kind of back up. Why do you think that is?
You know, that's such a great question, and it's so true and so incredibly sad. I think because with breast cancer or heart disease or diabetes, it's something that doesn't feel shameful, that we can see, we can feel, we can touch, but because depression is our brain, it's our brain chemistry, it's really a brain illness, people can't grasp that. And so I think that our society for so long kind of was ashamed of, people were ashamed of feeling sad or anxious or anything that had to do with their emotions, that they kind of hid it from everybody. And I hope that this, as you said, would be a teachable moment because of a person like Robin Williams, who was so beloved, that his death will help people to really understand that this was a man who on the surface had it all, and despite having it all, he still was ill, and that illness was from the inside, and that it's something that we really need to recognize because it really is a brain disease.
This is where we really need to open our minds as a society and start to look at a brain disease much like we did heart disease or breast cancer, as I said 30 years ago. We never even said breast cancer on the air when I first started in television, and yet now everyone has the pink ribbon on. We have an entire month devoted to it, and I'm always curious why we don't have that same compassion for people who do have mental illness.
Well, you know, you're right, and now we talk about autism openly, and we have an Autism Awareness Month, which is wonderful. I don't think we've really ever had a Depression Awareness Month or an Anxiety Awareness Month where people really embrace the fact that a large percentage of our population really does go through these illnesses, which are real illnesses, which are treated with medication and therapy, sometimes both, but this is a medical disorder.
It absolutely is. And Dr. Raphael, we talk about the medicines. Is this something that has to be treated constantly with medication, or can we use someone like Fran, who's a psychotherapist, or is there a combination of dealing with mental illness?
There's a spectrum of mental illness, particularly in depression, and various therapies, be they talk therapies, cognitive behavior therapies, medications. It really is dependent on the individual and what kind of depression they have. Sometimes it's situational, their life situation they need to change, or it could be a deep brain chemistry problem that needs medication.
Whatever it is, it definitely needs compassion. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Fran, thank you for being with us as well. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll have advice for you if you are talking to the doctor but you're not sure the doctor is listening. Stay with us. Welcome back to Meet the Doctors. I'm Lynn Doyle. You know, it can be very intimidating and confusing these days when you're consulting with your doctor. There are long wait times and only a few minutes to actually spend with the physician. So how do you make the most of that time? Let's return to our South Florida studios and Nick Tate and get his take on this. Nick, is it my imagination, or does it seem like the doctor's appointments are getting shorter, but the waiting times are getting longer?
I think you're absolutely right about that, Lynn. You know, doctors are more pressed for time than ever, and there are a number of reasons for that, but that's why it's so important to make the most of your doctor visit and make every minute count. Healthcare reform is adding to the time crunch that many doctors are facing today. Millions more insured Americans are entering the healthcare system just as a growing number of doctors are nearing or passing retirement age, and that's causing doctor shortages in many areas of the country, and that's putting a strain on the healthcare system. So that's a big reason that physicians tend to order so many tests and services for patients. Many simply don't have the time to spend with patients, getting good information and details on their health situation, so they go by the book and just order a common test or procedure or prescription medicine. But that's not always the best thing to do and not always in the patient's best interest.
Is it these days that it seems like there's a lot of tests that are being ordered that perhaps we don't really need? How do you suggest that patients empower themselves and make a decision that's good for them?
Well, you know, it's not just my opinion that too many tests and procedures are ordered up. According to the Institute of Medicine, the U.S. healthcare system squanders something on the order of about $750 billion a year, and much of that goes to wasteful spending on unnecessary tests. There's even a new initiative involving some 60 medical groups and patient advocacy organizations called the Choosing Wisely campaign that's identified something like 90 common tests and procedures that are often unnecessary. Some are costly, and some of them may even do more harm than good. So, you know, the question at this point is, you need to ask your doctor, why are you prescribing this for me? Why am I taking this med? Why am I going for this test? And press the doctor, press him or her for an answer. And I think that that will open up the dialogue, which is what really needs to happen. You know, patients need to take control of their own lives and use that time in the doctor's office to their own advantage.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to continue that dialogue here in our New York studios because we're joined by Dr. Lena Wen. She's an emergency physician and director of patient-centered care research at George Washington University, who has written a bestseller called When Doctors Don't Listen. It shows patients how they can empower themselves. Dr. Wen, delightful to have you with us.
Thank you. Glad to be with you as well.
You heard Nick talk about how frustrating it is for patients these days. You see it, I'm sure, every day in the emergency room. Do you agree with his assessment that there's just too many patients and not enough doctors and certainly not enough time?
I definitely agree. We have a problem in our country with our healthcare system. We know that doctors are under more pressure to see as many patients as possible in very little time. And also, doctors are not reimbursed for time with patients. We're reimbursed for things that we do to patients. And as a result, we just don't have the time to listen.
And yet, we as patients have come to you for help and guidance and suggestions on making ourselves feel better. So how do we coexist so that we can both do what we're hoping to accomplish?
So there's one statistic I want to share with you, that 80% of all diagnoses can be made just based on listening to your story. So listening and spending that time listening is so important. There are ways that patients can tell a better story so that they can help their doctors better help them.
So give me an example of how we can be better patients so that you can be a better doctor.
Know your own medical history. I can't tell you how many times in the ER I have a patient come in who says, I have no medical problems, and then I see a scar on their chest that shows they had heart surgery, and then they tell me they're on insulin. Help me help you. And also know why you're in the ER that day. Studies show that doctors will interrupt patients on an average of 10 seconds. So if you only have 10 seconds to tell your doctor your story of why you're there, you'd better get that down.
You wrote this book, When Doctors Don't Listen, How to Avoid Misdiagnoses and Unnecessary Tests, not just because you're a patient advocate, but because you had a personal experience in your family with your mother. Tell me what happened.
When I was a medical student, my mother was misdiagnosed for over a year before she was finally diagnosed with what turned out to be stage 4 breast cancer, cancer that by then had spread to her lungs and her brain. She had been telling her doctors that she was feeling tired and short of breath, and they kept on diagnosing her with depression and anxiety, but as it turned out, she had cancer. And I learned so much in that process of why it's so important for patients to be your own best advocate, and why caregivers also, why your family members and friends also have to speak up for you.
I was going to say, sometimes the patient himself just really doesn't have the energy to do it. So it's good to have a family member, a loved one who can be your advocate. And you suggest that along with some very helpful tips in the book on how we can take care of ourselves and empower ourselves.
Absolutely. Even if you just have a cold, you're not feeling well, you're not in the best state of mind to talk about your symptoms and talk about why you're there. So bringing someone with you is critical. And practicing, we don't think about going to the doctor and practicing our story, but we really have to practice. Write down the key points. If you know you only have limited time with your doctor, write down your story and practice it in advance.
I did want to talk to you before we finish our segment about your experience at the Boston Marathon and the bombings that occurred there. Can you recall for us perhaps the most vivid memory of that day?
I was working in the ER at Mass General Hospital the day of the Boston Marathon bombings, and I just remember all these patients coming in, one after the other, and we had no idea how many patients there would be. This happened right in my neighborhood. I lived in Boston, and I also didn't know who these patients were going to be. Some people were coming in missing arms and legs. Everybody was covered with blood and soot, and I thought, could this next patient be my husband? Could the person that I'm treating be someone who I love? And it was an incredible experience to see everyone come together as a city, to see the healthcare providers coming together, but it was also an incredibly frightening and disturbing time.
Something I'm sure that will stay with you for the rest of your life. And yet, the number of patients that you were able to treat and to help must give you a wonderful feeling, knowing that you were able to help these people on what had to be the worst day of their lives.
This is what we train for. I think it's important for us doctors to realize that what may seem routine to us is not routine for someone else in their time of need.
Well, we certainly want to thank you for what you did for those patients that day and what you're doing every day for your patients, and particularly for our viewers with writing this book. It was wonderful to have you with us. You're going to stick around and answer some of our viewer questions?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
We'll look forward to that, and that's coming up next, so stay with us here on Meet the Doctors. So this is the part of the show where you actually do get to meet the doctors. You send us questions of a medical nature and we put a panel together and they try to answer them to the best of their ability. So let's meet this week's participants. We're joined by Dr. Lena Wen, who is an emergency room doctor and a healthcare advocate. She's here in the New York studio with me, along with Dr. Joseph Raphael, who is co-founder of PhysioAge Medical Group in New York City. His field of medicine focuses on staying younger longer. You gotta love that. And then in our Florida studio is Dr. Peter Hibbert, who is Doctor of Emergency Medicine. Dr. Hibbert, it's good to have you back with us as well.
Thank you.
Let's start with this question. I'm a woman over 50. That sounds familiar. I've been eating fish and no meat for 20 years, but my hair's been thinning in the last 5 months. I'm on a very healthy diet and I take multivitamins and calcium with vitamin D. Do you have any advice? Who'd like that? Dr. Wen?
I would love to answer that question. It is important to find out if there are other causes for hair thinning. For example, are you using chemicals in your hair? At some point, your body may react differently to these chemicals, so stop all the chemicals at sea. You could also have another medical condition like low thyroid or deficiency in something else. Potentially, this could be an autoimmune disease where your body attacks itself. So before you go around changing your diet, go to your doctor and find out first.
You know, it's interesting because a lot of women start to notice thinning hair after menopause. She said she's 50, and even though she has the healthy diet, should she also perhaps check hormone levels or postmenopausal symptoms?
Absolutely. Menopause could be a cause for thinning hair, but it's also important to see if something else might be going on too.
Okay, another age-related question, this one for Dr. Raphael. I am 70 years old and in very good health, but I have erectile dysfunction. I am overweight and have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. I'm wondering if losing the weight will help me in the bedroom.
Well, I would say, first of all, that you're in very good health because you haven't been diagnosed with a disease yet. But with high blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, you quite likely have some kind of arterial disease. That typically goes along with having erectile dysfunction. You could have problems in your coronary arteries. So I would get to your doctor and make sure, perhaps have a stress test or some evaluation of your heart, because those two go hand in hand. You want to exercise and you want to increase your vigor, but you want to first make sure that you're capable of doing it.
You know, it's interesting, earlier in the show, Dr. Wen talked about knowing your own medical history, and it sounds like this is a perfect example of someone who's not quite in tune with his medical history. He says he's in good health, but he has high cholesterol and he's overweight.
A lot of men in particular don't like going to the doctor. They may avoid the doctor almost like the plague, and so they may not know about underlying medical conditions, and so it's really important to get that checked out.
Okay. Dr. Hibbert, we have one for you. I was diagnosed with polymyalgia about 4 years ago. Steroids and narcotics do not seem to help, and they give me digestive problems. Most days I can hardly walk. The pain is very bad. What else might I try?
Well, I think before you try, you need to really define what you're talking about with polymyalgia. There are various conditions that cause aching in the muscles. That's what polymyalgia means, multiple aching through the body. Some forms of polymyalgia are an autoimmune disease that needs very specific treatment by the rheumatologist because they have adverse consequences on your health in a big way. Others are just minor aches and pains related to aging. So I think the first thing to do before we tell you what to do is to find out what type of polymyalgia you have, and for that you're going to need to go to your doctor and drill them until you find out what it is that's causing your muscle aches. Is it an electrolyte deficiency? Is it an autoimmune disorder? Is it some other condition that you're not aware that you have? Go see your doctor.
We often hear that medication does cause digestive problems, whether it's for polymyalgia or something else. What do you say to patients who end up with tummy troubles, but it's medication or narcotics that they absolutely have to take?
Well, we have protective medicines for people who have to take anti-inflammatories, and in many cases we can change the kind of drug that they're taking so that tummy discomfort becomes an issue of the past. It's very important they discuss this with their doctor, and again gets into the same situation. When you see your doctor, make sure you tell them that you're having tummy troubles. Don't just band-aid it. Your treatment needs to be modified.
Dr. Raphael, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just going to say that it seems like he has been diagnosed with some kind of polymyalgia, perhaps polymyalgia rheumatica, but severely low vitamin D levels can cause aching all over your body. I've had many patients come in with levels in the very bottom end of the range, and as soon as you put them on a good dose of vitamin D and bring it back up, it goes away. So it's something to look out for.
The vitamins are another question that our viewers always write in about, and I have a personal question about that myself because I find that I have stomach trouble if I take vitamins, particularly on an empty stomach. Is that just, I was going to say, is that just I'm doing it wrong?
Correct. Never take vitamins on an empty stomach. They should always be with food in there because it helps them be absorbed. You need the acid for absorbing many of them. The fat in food can help with the fat-soluble vitamins. So you can get rid of your GI stress and distress and make your vitamins be absorbed better if you take them with food.
I need to be a better patient, which is exactly what Dr. Nguyen was telling us to do, that we have to become an advocate for ourselves.
Absolutely. You have to help your doctor help you, and knowing your body and knowing what are the things to do can also help you. But then a lot of times doctors may assume that patients know. And so if you have a question, don't be shy about asking your doctor.
You know, I guess taking it with the coffee first thing in the morning on the empty stomach doesn't really help either. And then I find myself saying, you know what, maybe I won't take it today because I don't feel like I want that stomach issue, but I'm going to change the way I do things because of what you suggested. Okay, we're going to take a real quick break, and when we come back, we'll answer some more of your questions. If you'd like to join in, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to return to your viewer questions with our panel of doctors. Let's return to our South Florida studio where Dr. Peter Hibbert is standing by. Here's a question for you that you don't hear every day. Is sea salt better than regular salt? And how about alternative seasonings like accent, which is supposed to have, I guess, less sodium than table salt? What do you think?
Well, when it comes to sodium loads, we're talking about patients taking too much salt in their diets for a start. So anytime we can reduce the amount of sodium in our diet at the moment is probably a good move. As far as substituting with salt substitutes, many of them have potassium salts in them, and they have their own issues. So sea salt and salt, I'm not convinced that we're going to see a big difference in whether you use sea salt or regular table salt. So I'm neutral on that. As far as the accent story, accent is a mixture of more than just salt. So you're taking spices in with that as well. I wouldn't really, I think the trick here is to season to taste and kind of get away from the regular use of the salt shaker in your cooking and try to add it at the table just to your individual taste. Some people don't need a lot of salt and for their taste buds, and others, it's an acquired taste, so others need more. So I think that the advice we have nowadays is to try to reduce your sodium load as much as possible.
Okay, now we have another one about whooping cough, which I thought had been eradicated at some point, but apparently not. It seems it's making its way across the country. Our next viewer is wondering about vaccinations. We all had these shots when we were youngsters, but should we get a so-called booster shot now? and at what age should we get that shot?
Well, there has been a resurgence in whooping cough, and the CDC does recommend that we get, as an adult or after, if it's more than 10 years since your last one, a booster shot, which is usually combined with tetanus as well. So that's a good idea, particularly if you're around infants and younger children, because you're more susceptible, and then you can pass it on to them. It's a good idea to get that booster shot and go to your doctor. If you don't know how long it's been, it's not going to be a problem if you get a booster, so go ahead.
I was going to say, I have no idea. I'm certain it's 40 years. But I do have grandsons. Aren't they already vaccinated for it? Am I actually at a risk of getting it from them?
Potentially. Not every vaccination is completely 100% effective, and there are some people who are not letting their kids get vaccinations anymore, which is a bad idea. And so I think that's perhaps part of the reason why there is a resurgence.
Okay, so I'm making an appointment to talk to my doctor and get a booster shot for whooping cough. Okay, how about that? Here's another question, this one for Dr. Wen. I'm in a senior tennis league, I'm 58, and sometimes I find that my hands and my feet cramp up terribly after an hour or so of playing, even though I drink a lot of water when I play, so I don't think it's dehydration. Could I have a vitamin deficiency? Do I have low blood sugar? What do you think I should do?
You should ask your doctor about being checked for electrolyte deficiencies. It's possible, so electrolytes are sodium, potassium, calcium. Sometimes your body's levels can be thrown off as a result of illness, as a result of something else happening. Getting that checked out is a simple blood test. So check that out. Also, your doctor can look into whether you have a thyroid issue or anemia or something else too that can also contribute to this.
Dr. Hibbert, dehydration is something I'm certain that you see quite often in the heat of South Florida. What should we do to avoid becoming a victim of it?
Well, the key is to recognize that it can happen. Once you recognize that when you're out in the sun that you're going to have insensible losses through your skin, then you can make sure that you have some fluids, that you carry fluids with you. So if you're going on a bike ride, make sure you take a couple of little containers of water to sip along the way. If you're running, do the same thing. You've seen the marathon runners and the checkpoints where they hand water out all the time. Make sure you stay well hydrated. If you don't hydrate yourself while you're exercising or while you're in the sun, then you're going to run complications that may go as far as fainting or other more serious things. So I think the key is recognition of where you will have dehydration occur. A lot of people don't think that they get dehydrated just by just walking outside. And in climates like Arizona, it's even worse because it's very, very dry and there's tremendous insensible losses through the skin.
Remember also that it's not just water to drink, that it's important to drink things like Gatorade, Powerade, something else that has some electrolytes, some other balance of things in it too. And definitely watch the temperature. Dress in layers can also help you. It may be not so hot when you're first starting out, but you may lose, or it may get really hot and you may lose these insensible losses from what Dr. Hibbert was saying too.
Is dehydration worse as we get older?
Yes, the cooling mechanisms are not as well developed, particularly because of loss of growth hormone. So you can get more susceptible to dehydration and heat stroke actually as well. But also, it's sort of the opposite problem with athletes with regard to the salt. You can't, oftentimes it's not just water, you have to take in a certain amount of salt if you're going to do intense exercise, particularly when it gets above an hour in duration. So you want to take in water, but also something like an electrolyte drink or just a salt tablet.
Okay, one last question, Dr. Wen. We talked earlier in the show about unnecessary tests. How do we make sure that our physicians are not running unnecessary tests and yet being an advocate for ourselves, making sure that they are looking for the right thing?
Always ask your doctor, why is this test being done? Is it meant to show one thing versus another? It's important to know that before you get the test done. Also ask what the alternatives of the test are. Sometimes watching and waiting is a very good alternative, so know what that is. And then ask about side effects. Just like every treatment, every test has potential side effects too. So ask about that before you get anything done.
It seems like the lesson of today's show is to be an advocate for yourself. Dr. Peter Hibbert, thank you very much for being with us. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, Lynn.
And Dr. Joseph Raphael and Dr. Lena Wen, thank you for being here as well. And most importantly, we thank you for being with us. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Until the next time, stay happy and healthy. I'm Lynn Doyle from Meet the Doctors.